57 years after humans first walked on the moon, we're still discovering secrets about the Apollo missions that will blow your mind. Because the story you learn in school, that's the sanitized version. The real story involves near-death experiences, Cold War espionage, and technology that barely worked. In the next 11 minutes, I'm going to show you the untold truths that NASA kept quiet for decades. And trust me, this changes everything. Let's start with something wild. Apollo 11, the most famous mission in history, almost ended in disaster multiple times before they even landed. 60 seconds before touchdown, Neil Armstrong's computer started flashing error codes. Program alarms. 1202, 1201. The computer was overloaded. They had 30 seconds of fuel left. Mission Control had to make a split-second decision that would either make history or become the worst tragedy in space exploration. They chose to continue. Armstrong manually piloted over a boulder field the size of a football stadium with fuel gauge hitting zero. But here's what's crazy. That wasn't even the closest call of the Apollo program. Apollo 12 got struck by lightning. Twice. During launch. Within 36 seconds. Every instrument in the spacecraft went haywire. The fuel cells went offline. Navigation was dead. They were flying blind on top of millions of pounds of rocket fuel. A 26-year-old flight controller named John Aaron remembered an obscure switch from a training simulation a year earlier. SCE to AUX. He saved the mission with 3 words. And Apollo 13? Everyone knows it exploded. But what most people don't know is how impossibly close they came to dying. The explosion happened 200,000 miles from Earth. They had to use the lunar module as a lifeboat, but it was designed for 2 people for 2 days. 3 astronauts had to survive for 4 days. The carbon dioxide scrubbers were designed for the command module, not the LM. They were literally being poisoned by their own breath. Engineers on Earth had to figure out how to fit a square peg into a round hole using only materials the astronauts had on board. Duct tape, plastic bags, and cardboard from a flight manual. Now let's talk about why this race to the moon was happening in the first place. Because it wasn't really about science. In 1961, President Kennedy was getting destroyed in the Cold War. The Soviets launched the first satellite. First animal in space. First human in space. First spacewalk. America looked weak. So Kennedy made a promise that seemed impossible. We choose to go to the moon before this decade is out. Not because it's easy, but because we're losing. Here's the insane part. When Kennedy made that speech, NASA didn't know how to get to the moon. They didn't have the rockets. They didn't have the computers. They had 8 years to invent everything. At its peak, the Apollo program employed 400,000 people and consumed 4% of the entire federal budget. In 2026 dollars, that's over $300 billion. But the Soviets were still in the race. And this is where it gets really interesting. They had a secret moon rocket called the N1. It was bigger than the Saturn V. 30 engines firing simultaneously. And it exploded. Every single time. One explosion was so massive it destroyed the launch pad and could be seen from space. The Soviets covered it up for 20 years. The world had no idea how close the race actually was. Meanwhile, NASA was dealing with their own disasters. Apollo 1, January 1967. 3 astronauts died in a fire during a ground test. The cabin was pure oxygen. A single spark from faulty wiring created an inferno. The hatch took 90 seconds to open. They had 17 seconds before the heat became unsurvivable. The tragedy almost killed the entire program. NASA redesigned the spacecraft. 2,000 changes. The hatch now opened in 3 seconds. But let's talk about the technology they were using. Because by today's standards, it was laughably primitive. The Apollo guidance computer had 64 kilobytes of memory. Your smartphone has literally 4 million times more computing power. 4 million. The navigation system used a sextant. The same tool sailors used in the 1700s. They navigated to the moon by looking at stars through a telescope. And the lunar module? That thing was held together with what basically amounted to aluminum foil and prayers. The walls were thinner than a soda can. It had never been tested in actual space conditions until Apollo 9. The first time humans actually flew it in space was only 4 months before the moon landing. The descent engine had to work perfectly. No test fires. One chance. If it failed to ignite, the astronauts would orbit the moon forever until their oxygen ran out. Now here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The backup crews. The astronauts who trained for years and never got to go. For every astronaut who walked on the moon, there were dozens who came within weeks of getting their chance. Mission cancellations, budget cuts, bad timing. Apollo 18, 19, and 20 were canceled. Rockets were already built. Astronauts were already assigned. Congress decided the money was better spent elsewhere. Only 12 humans have ever walked on the moon. 12 out of 8 billion people alive today. And the last person to do it was 54 years ago in December 1972. 4 of them are still alive in 2026. Buzz Aldrin is 96. The last person to walk on the moon, Gene Cernan, died in 2017. So what did we leave behind on the moon? Because it's not just footprints. We left 6 American flags, though they're probably bleached white by radiation now. We left 96 bags of human waste. Golf balls, family photos, a gold olive branch, a silicon disc with messages from 73 world leaders. We left retroreflectors that we still use today. Scientists bounce lasers off them to measure the distance to the moon with millimeter precision. That's proof we were really there. And here's something beautiful. We left a plaque that says, "We came in peace for all mankind." Not for America, for all mankind. The Apollo missions prove that humans can do impossible things when we work together. 57 years later, we're finally going back with Artemis. This time, we're going to stay. Belmanon Baz, the first woman on the moon, the first person of color on the moon, a launching point to Mars. If this video blew your mind, smash that like button and subscribe to Your Space Wizard for more stories that make the universe feel incredible. The real story of Apollo isn't just about rockets and computers. It's about humans who looked at the impossible and said, "We're doing it anyway." That spirit never died. It's just waiting for us to remember it.